Perfect. Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Dallas Housing Coalition's Housing for All webinar series. My name is Brian Toney. I'm the Executive Director of the Dallas Housing Coalition. Today, we are hosting the 37th installment of our Housing for All webinar series, where we discuss whether Dallas is big and if it is truly big enough for everyone. We hope that you've been finding these impactful conversations one-on-one with our DHC members and other community leaders helpful. They are our strongest advocates for keeping Dallas affordable. We're joined today by Joe Dingman, treasurer and co-founder of the Catholic Housing Initiative. Originally from Iowa, he earned a Bachelor of Arts degree from Benedictine College in Kansas and then an MBA from Marquette University. He went to work for a firm that provided real estate investment management and in the around 2000 left that firm to establish his own business, the Orion Realty Advisors. Following this, Joe and three other individuals founded a nonprofit, the Catholic Housing Initiative, in 1991. And most recently, CHI celebrated completing 7 affordable homes in the 5 Mile neighborhood and a number of permanent supportive housing developments that we'll talk about today with the city of Dallas to turn under-resourced areas into thriving housing hubs, as well as provide permanent supportive housing for our chronically homeless and those who need other wraparound services. So please join me in welcoming Joe to the show. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you, Tony. Good morning and good morning to all. I appreciate the introduction, Tony, and I'm glad to be here. I'm honored, actually.
We're happy to have you. This is a timely conversation. I know you guys have a lot going on. As mentioned, you were the co-founder of Catholic Housing Initiative. Would you mind by starting off with your journey and how CHI came about and what inspired it?
You bet. Tony, like all good things, it evolved. We actually started, two things can be true at once, and you can do two things at one time. So we actually started this in 91 with a mission to build a Catholic retirement community. And that wandered around, actually it had wandered around for years even before then, but it wandered around a little bit. We found that we were able to buy broken apartments that had been foreclosed by the government's company that closed all the banks and S&Ls in the late 80s. We found that we were able to buy pretty good quality real estate for, figuratively speaking, a dime on the dollar. And we sort of got sidetracked and lulled into thinking that we were actually in the affordable housing business. I often say that affordable housing needs a subsidy. It either has to be capital or rental based. And in this case, the government was in effect providing a great big capital subsidy by selling you assets for 10 cents on the dollar. So we bought 3 of those properties from the RTC. We had a great run with them. They increased in value, provided, in effect, the borrowing power to do a bunch of other things by refinancing them after we'd seen them recover in value. And we eventually got to the Catholic retirement community. It exists today in Coppell. It's called St. Joseph Village. It's a wonderful place. That's sort of, I thought for a long time, the most important thing I would do in my life, but I have come to appreciate that other things are maybe more important. So I would say, to sum it up, Brian, we've gone to 3 phases. One is buying cheap assets, if you will, and in effect letting the seller be the subsidizing agency. The second would be to do developments, and we've done several of those, including Gateway Oak Cliff most recently, which is a 230 unit tax credit. And finally, the permanent supportive housing, which kind of overlays all of it, which is a distinctly different operation in that it has a lot of moving parts as opposed to simply buying assets or even developing assets.
Awesome. So why the 3 phases? Is that just what the times required? Yeah.
It just happened. Actually, if you think about it, the phases correspond to complexity.
Hmm.
Buying assets and operating them is pretty simple. All you got to have is money and have a brain. Developing is quite a bit more complicated than that. And of course, overlaying supportive services is quite a bit more complicated than just development. So
Yeah.
I would say complexity is the continuum there.
Awesome. So you've now opened three St. Jude centers, which are, from my understanding, permanent supportive housing with those wraparound services. Now working on a fourth. How has your approach to providing housing for the chronically homeless evolved, and what do you think the impact has been that these centers have made in Dallas?
They've really been revolutionary for a variety of reasons. Uh, from I'm a money guy, really. I may not look like it, but that's my background.
Sure.
I know how to invest, budget, plan, borrow, all of these things more than I know how to do other things. From my perspective, the most important um, strategy of the St. Jude Centers is adaptive reuse.
Mm.
We were able to buy, in each of the three cases, we were able to buy assets for a fraction of the replacement cost, make a relatively modest investment in improvements to make them as good as new. So, in effect, you capture a great deal of value by that. The second critical factor there is the supportive services. In fact, if anybody's thinking about doing that and you don't have the supportive services in mind, stop and reconsider because you're on the wrong track. The supportive services came to us with Catholic Charities of Dallas. We resisted actually sort of complex daily operating properties until sort of the end of the period when the city of Dallas foundered on their $250 million proposal from the Mike Rawlings Committee for how to house the homeless.
Mm.
And at that point, Larry James actually got us together and said, why don't you guys think about partnering where Catholic Charities does the on-site work and you guys just basically provide the money and the capital and the real estate. So that also was important. And that introduced us to a third important strategy, which is diversification. The classic way, if you're housing forward, the classic way to do this is to wait years and years and get a 100% HAP contract and use that as the bait to attract the tenants. We didn't want to wait. So what we did was to go to all the other nonprofits that were in the affordable housing space and say, look, we're able to get the units, but we don't have the residents. Why don't you use a piece of our facility on a sub-rental basis, basically? I mean, financially, legally, it doesn't work that way, but it's effectively that. And that turned out to be a masterstroke in the sense that it diversified the risk. It enabled us to fill it more quickly. It also scratched an itch that the other nonprofits had, which is they didn't have ready access to the units. So we, in effect, created a model that enables a lot of people to collaborate and move more quickly than that. And I would say the fourth is just good common sense, high quality management. We don't have any tolerance for deferred maintenance. We don't have any tolerance for antisocial behavior, if you will. So we're not afraid to boot people that can't live communally without disrupting everybody else.
Gotcha.
And I could go on. I can speak for days, but I know you only have a few minutes. So
Yeah, I wanted to give our audience a look at these St. Jude centers and what you're talking about with the adaptive reuse. So, uh, job well done. They're called the St. Jude centers because of that partnership with Catholic Charities, or is there another reason that they're called St. Jude centers?
well, I'm Catholic, and I know from being a kid, you even wore a little medal around your neck with St. Jude. He was the patron saint of hopeless causes, if you will.
Mm,
So that it took about 3 seconds for that to come to mind when we did this.
great. And you mentioned a couple partnerships with Catholic Charities and the city of Dallas. They did have funding for homelessness, about $20 million in 2017 through a bond
That,
program.
let me interrupt for a second. They
Mhm.
hadn't yet got to there, or if they did, they didn't think about using it. They had a NOFA in late 2016 when we got this brain storm, if you will.
Sure.
And so we just applied to the NOFA and said we need $2.5 million for a $6 million project. And so they gave us home money rather than the bond money. Uh,
Yeah.
it, it, and it worked out quite nicely. We got about $1.5 million from the county for that project. We got $500,000 from the Federal Home Loan Bank. We really literally pieced it together on and actually over a period of time. We've had great support from the city of Dallas, but I often tell people that there was a lot more faith and common sense in our approach, but it somehow seems to work out.
Glad to hear that. It's been, yeah, highly successful. How, from a financial standpoint, it sounds like it made these projects possible. Catholic Charities is the on-site management. What has been the biggest challenges in developing permanent supportive housing?
The biggest challenge is housing subsidies. As anybody who's watching knows, DHA is challenged. And if you think about it from a financial standpoint, rentals in Dallas are increasing at a rate faster than inflation, or have certainly in recent years. And if you think about it, you bifurcate the layer of the rental that DHA pays and the layer that the tenant pays. Well, the tenant share of that is pretty constant. DHA is suffering all the inflation on a fraction of the base. That sucks up really all of their budget, which is not increasing anywhere near the rate of inflation, by the way. And so they've had to basically put an embargo on issuing new voucher units. And they're, as people die or move away, they're in effect having to redirect the what's it called, the lapsing into just paying the base. So periodically, they are able to come up with a project-based voucher of 25 or 50 or even 100 units, but it's very infrequent, and you have to hop right on it when that comes. In fact, that was a huge problem at the outset of our Forest Lane operation, where they had offered us a voucher contract. I forget the number of units, and they had the experience of bad run of inflation, which sucked up all their discretionary cash flow, and they actually reneged on the offer and left us, just as we opened, with 100 units and zero subsidies. We ended up eating the public share of the rental for several months, and for some reason we managed to survive that. But they've been most helpful within the framework of their own funding system. We also found out, to our great surprise, that the county had vouchers. I mean, most people probably know this, but I didn't. And the county was very helpful and has actually given us a project-based contract that covers both our Park Central and Forest Lane operation. So we've had tons of public support from those two agencies. We can't say enough about how supportive they have been, but they're living within a budgetary system that just doesn't give them much flexibility.
Yeah, I could see definitely how that makes it difficult to forecast your planning, your revenues, your operating, maintenance, and everything in between.
Well, sometimes, Brian, you just have to be aggressive and push and say, we're going to go ahead and do this on faith. And that's got us where we are. I mean, if you waited for things to fall into place before you start a project, we wouldn't have done a third of what we've done.
That's great. Kudos to y'all for sure. To zoom in a little bit on a specific neighborhood, you've pledged to build 100 affordable homes in 5 Mile, a historically under-resourced community. What is the latest on this initiative, and how do you foresee it changing that community in the long term?
Um, there's a day worth of conversation there too, Brian. I will say that philosophically, I believe in ownership housing. There's a million studies that prove that owning a house is the single most important thing a family can do in their whole life, at least financially. I shouldn't say, and even it sort of spills over into your well-being because owning a house, if you got problems and no home, uh, uh, you just can't solve them. Owning a house is better. Uh, Financially speaking, it's probably a life-changing experience for most people. So we believe in that philosophically. Um, we had a short relationship with a guy who had worked with Habitat, and he frankly persuaded us to do this, but it tied right into our belief system, so we took it on. Fundamentally, the city, it's a neighborhood that got developed in the 50s. The developer was killed in a plane crash. The lots had a lot of roll to them. The infrastructure was never completed, in part because it was not in the city at the time it was developed. It was in the county. So there's a lot of needs. And for a variety of reasons, it came to be virtually a 100% African American community, and it came to be maybe only 20% of its potential, with a lot of empty lots, a lot of lots that had topo problems that you just couldn't build on. So anyway, we committed to the city to doing, as you say, actually it was 99, but 100's close enough. We developed an agreement with the city where they are giving us the lots 20 at a time. The promise is that the lots are $1,000, but that's a big old lie. You have to pay the back taxes. You have to clear the brush off them, which is probably $5,000 a lot. You have to solve the topo problems, which often is $10,000, $20,000 a lot. So these lots are free but not cheap, if you will. They end up costing you, by the time you put them into developable condition, they end up costing you $20,000, $30,000, say, which is better than market, frankly. We also have some Rochoto, so 40 of the lots are tied to a HUD subsidy that we can draw on at the completion of the house. So we have some offsets in terms of the peculiar costs of the neighborhood. We are building houses 20 at we're getting lots 20 at a time, and we're building in batches of 10 at a time. We use two builders, both young, or at least young to me. They look to be more like Brian's age. African American guys, one a little bit more experienced than the other, but both in the home building business and working for other people at the same time. So we use them as, in effect, a general contractor to build a house. Right now, we're paying them each $200,000 a house. That would be a 1,500-foot 322 house. And we stand the lot prep costs and the lot costs and on top of that. So our finished cost of a house is probably on the average in the 220, 230 area. We're selling that house for 239 today. There are brokerage and title insurance costs to sell the house, to say nothing of the carry. So on a good day, we break even. And on some of the houses, we have this HUD subsidy, which provides, in effect, a profit that you can spread over the whole program. So today, we have built 35 houses. We have sold and closed 26 of them. We have 9 houses in inventory. Of them, I think two are complete and CO'd, five are substantially complete, and a couple of them are just now getting started. The buyers of these houses are typically first-time buyers. We have a relationship with Inwood Bank. Big shout out to them. They're for the right kind of buyer, they will do a mortgage that's lower than market and keep it on their books as a CRA initiative. So we have a construction financing scheme with them for more or less half of our houses. And they also do some retail loans. Other people catch the retail loans. And it's at this point where we run into our hugest problem, which is called Dallas Housing Assistance Program, or DHAP in short. That's a wonderful program where the city will give you a second mortgage up to $50,000 to, in effect, borrow less from your first lender and thereby drive your monthly payments down so that you can afford the house at 80% or less of AMI. That's a killer program in terms of getting your way through it. The buyer is responsible for it. The buyer is usually very ill prepared to do it. Mm-hmm. So it takes some hand holding. It also takes some time, and DHAP refuses to start the analysis until they get a full loan package as well as the buyer's application and an appraisal. Often that's 30 days after you complete the house. DHAP takes 30 to 60 days if it works. So you're talking about carrying a completed house 60 to 90 days after the darn thing is ready to occupy. So this is not only risky, it's troublesome and costly. I'm working with the city to try to get them to rejigger their process. We've all dealt with the city, and they're just shall I say gracefully, less help than they might be. But we love the program because at the completion, we can show the buyer how the appraised value of the house relative to their hard obligations gives them more or less $100,000 of equity. This is for people who really couldn't afford to buy a used car before that. So we're very proud to have made 26 homeowners with net worth in that neighborhood. There's a final philosophy at work here. We think, and we know, that if you can provide a critical mass of new housing, you can actually turn a neighborhood. And we've seen that work. There's a couple streets in there that didn't have water lines. Well, we put the water line in, for example, on Plumdale in the 6,000 block. If you go there today, you will see our 4 new houses complete. You will see across the street 3 new houses that are complete and occupied, and you'll see 3 others under construction. So that street has gone from 0 to 60 in just a couple of years, and it happened solely because the city agreed to sell the lot suites. So we're very proud of this. I got to tell you in closing, it's a pain in the neck to do. I often say that I can build 100 apartments for no more effort than 10 of these houses.
Wow.
But sad but true, that's the nature of the beast. Infill lots, working on infill lots is just a lot of overhead.
Yeah, it's a great location. There's a huge park over here, Keys Park. There's some stores, retail, Pan-African Connection, tons of Black art and literature there. I know there used to be a grocery store, Fort Oak Cliff, that was working on some more amenities, but close to these highways.
It's actually a little to the south of your map.
Okay.
Hey, there's a picture of me.
Yeah.
It's a little bit south of there. It's about 2 miles west of Paul Quinn College at the intersection of Lancaster and Simpson Stewart.
Perfect. And so yeah, District 8, Southern Dallas. 80 to 120%.
By the way, I'd like to give a shout out to Council Member Tanel Atkins. a great deal of the problem in the 5 Mile neighborhood is not only the location and the historic discrimination, let's face it, it lacked a lot of infrastructure. He saw to it that the city created, in addition to the water line projects that we did, he saw to it that the city took on some repaving, utility infrastructure upgrades, and even new supply. I'm guessing that the city has probably spent 20 million in infrastructure in their own way, and that has helped us as well.
Fantastic. Before we wrap up today, you recently wrote an op-ed in the Dallas Morning News talking about housing supply and how, regardless of whether it's reserved for folks on the lower end of the income spectrum, middle class, or even maybe upper class, increasing the housing supply can help reduce rent across a community. Can you elaborate on, what the point you're trying to make and what you're using to make your case from a data standpoint?
Sure.
Yeah.
If you have a pool of demand for anything, let's say apples, there's all kinds of apples. There's all kinds of brands. There's green ones, there's red ones, there's Fuji, and so forth. Some are expensive, some are not. But demand for apples is fluid. If you go to the grocery store and you want green ones, they don't have them, you buy a red one. And that's an analogy to the pricing hierarchy. It's intuitively obvious, but a lot of people refuse to accept it, that the introduction of a $500,000 house into the market absorbs a buyer, and that buyer were not for the $500,000 house. He can't afford 6, but he certainly can afford 4. He'll slide down and buy the 4 if he needs a house. So it's a very simple concept of fluidity of buyers choosing what's available in the market. I'd like to elaborate on that a little bit. If you extend my thought, obviously, we need to do all of the above in terms of increasing supply, which ties right into my field argument. I believe in the concept of the ADU. I know politically that's horribly troublesome to people.
It shouldn't. Yeah, we don't think it should be, but I know it's.
We don't think it should be, but I met actually with one of the state reps who's a progressive, a guy who ought to be a believer of this. He will go to his grave believing that ADUs are simply bad, and that's simply because his election bases are people that look like me that own a single-family house on a 7,500-foot lot, who view the ADU as a threat to their way of life. So I think duplexes ought to be allowed by right wherever you can have a single family house. So over a 50-year period, you in effect double the housing supply on a square mile. And I mean, I just can't see why that is controversial, but yet it is. And I think it's, I often say this to a politician, the fear of being ousted out of office is worse than the fate of death or disease. They're so entrenched in their office that changing little things like that affect a lot of people is just troublesome. But we got to do it. Right now, it's just morally bankrupt to not address the scarcity that afflicts us.
Yeah. Well, I think the ADU legalization bill has been refiled this legislative session. It was close to passing last time, and hopefully, that representative or other representatives get the chance to consider a change of their position if they can get around some of their concerns. I know, traffic or parking might be one of them, but like you said, does that outweigh the good of our community and the need for more housing and people to have that choice and not play the game of musical chairs looking for whatever housing they could find?
Well said, Brian.
Is there anything that we didn't talk about today that you would like to elevate, Joe?
Oh man, uh, as I said, I could talk for a week. Uh, no, I don't really have anything to add other than to thank you for the opportunity to speak, which is most enjoyable to me. Uh, I I love being engaged in this business. It's sort of to me, it's like a puzzle, and I'm fond of working on things that have complexity but have a very rewarding solution. And so I'm invested in housing with both feet. Anyway, I thank you for the opportunity. I thank your audience for being so attentive. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. And if there's any way that, they can further support you, of course, we'll keep them updated on everything that the coalition is doing through our social media. And we encourage everyone to get involved at our website, dallashousingcoalition.com, where you can become a member of the coalition like Catholic Housing Initiative has. And right now we're working on parking reform. So that's moving forward, and they're trying to reduce the amount of spaces per unit, Joe. And I think we're down to half a space per unit now. So uh, hopefully that's an improvement, or helps your future developments to make it easier to develop.
Yeah, parking is a little piece of the puzzle, but our experience is, and it certainly add costs and therefore
Yeah,
difficulty. But our experience is that that capital and the rental subsidies are much bigger problems than parking. But
sure.
it's as I say, a piece of the puzzle.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for joining us today, Joseph. Thanks all to our audience for tuning in to our 37th Housing for All webinar, where we discuss whether Dallas is big and if it's truly big enough for everyone. Have a great week.